Dr. Dan here. Welcome back. So today we're covering chapter 6, which is about World War II, and I'm not going to spend much time on it at all. So you're going to have to go through the book and read the chapter, but it's a great chapter. It's probably one of the best ones in the book. It's a really easy read. I think it's very succinct and to the point, and I think if you want to get a good overview of the factors leading to World War II and the peace settlement after World War II, it's a great chapter to read. So with that, let's get started. Pardon me, my computer's making all kinds of noises, but let's just move on. So this World War II, I have a connection to it, all right? So what you're looking at right now is a picture of my father in Paris in World War II. Near the end of World War II, my dad was a tank driver in the 2nd Armored Division in World War II, and he was actually drafted out of high school between his junior and senior year when he was 17 years old to be a tank driver. So it's a story. I like to have students think about this because some of you are in high school right now taking this class as college credit. And can you imagine, being drafted out of high school and next thing you know, you're in a tank going into Germany waiting for the Red Army. So we'll talk about that. But I just wanted to share that with you. I think one of the cool things about contemporary or modern history is that, most of us have some sort of connection to it. If you don't have a direct connection like I do, maybe your grandparents or someone else in your family, lived through the Depression or, lived through the Holocaust or lived through World War II or whatever. So there's more of a connection as we get closer to current times. And we're in this context of the 1940s, 1930s, and everything that we've read about moving up to this point, nationalism, all those things play into it. So when you get into the book, you're going to read this first section, 6.1, and it's going to talk about the rise of dictatorial regimes. So go ahead and read that. I guess the only point I want to make here in the lecture is that one of the things to keep in mind as you're reading this stuff isn't ancient history. These are modern societies that this is all happening to, just like our society today. And so even though it seems like, oh, this couldn't happen here, when you read about Germany and the rise of Hitler, and even Japan to some extent, please understand the lesson that comes out of this section 6.1 in the book is that people are vulnerable to anyone that promises hope when things are bad, okay? And some leaders even tell you, hey, things are bad first, and then tell you, hey, they're bad, but we're going to make them better. So, gifted speakers, gifted orators can make promises that even, the most scrutinizing citizens are gullible enough to follow. And that's true in American politics, all right? So if you're involved in American politics at all, you know how these charismatic leaders are the ones that, get the votes and, go out on the campaign trail and kind of take over. And it was really no different than Hitler in the 1930s, who started a political party and, basically said, hey, look, times are bad. And the German people got a raw deal from the end of World War I. True, Germany was in the middle of the Great Depression. True, things were very bad there in the 1930s. So Hitler had a vulnerable audience who were willing to believe anything because they were suffering so much. So that's a universal lesson. It doesn't just go back to Hitler, but we see it today in our politics, even on a small local level. A politician may say, hey, look, things aren't working now, so you should vote for the school levy or whatever. It's the same kind of thing. This combination of vulnerability and charisma is what gets societies in trouble every time. And again, continuing on with that lesson, the Germans weren't necessarily bad people because they followed Hitler, although, there are some debates about that, but not everyone really knew about the atrocities that would come. So again, when people are vulnerable, when conditions are bad, people are more willing to accept something that's better, even if they don't really know what it's going to be. So, always promises have great value to them. So read about that in 6.1 and the conditions in Germany, and then you'll read about the path to war in Europe. And the lesson out of 6.2 is this idea of appeasement. And appeasement in this case means that Hitler became aggressive with his army. He occupied the Rhineland, the demilitarized zone, and nobody did anything about it. In other words, France and Great Britain were always warning Hitler, hey, don't be too aggressive. But when he is a little aggressive and they don't do anything about it, then he goes a little bit farther and invades Poland. And so the lesson there is that appeasement isn't always a great strategy, and maybe something to bring it home to life is one of the reasons that the Western world and NATO is so aggressive in Ukraine right now against Putin, is because no one wants to appease Putin. Because if you do, what's he going to take after Ukraine if he's able to take Ukraine? So this idea of appeasement is an important part of the beginning of World War II as far as Europe goes. When you look at the path to war in Asia, all right, the Japanese part of the war, same kind of thing going on over there. You had the Japanese being very aggressive in their imperialism as far as occupying parts of China is concerned, occupied Manchuria, renamed it Manchukuo, sort of a puppet state in China, and the Japanese army was being very aggressive, horrendously aggressive in China. And, the Western powers didn't do too much about it. And again, this idea of not only the Western powers, but Chiang Kai-shek, who was the leader of the Chinese nationalists, appeased the Japanese and said, okay, as long as you aren't more aggressive, we're cool. Well, that wasn't the case. So again, lessons from 6.2 and 6.3 in the chapter is that appeasement doesn't always work, and it's a key point when you're thinking about, how did these wars start, and how did Japan and how did Germany get so aggressive in the first place. So when you get up to 6.4, that's the world at war, talks about the war itself. Read through it. I think it's a really good section to the chapter. It talks about how the U.S. sent arms to Russia as part of the Lend-Lease program. But again, the big lesson from this section is the Holocaust and the fact that, Germany, exterminates 6 million Jews in death camps. And again, it couldn't happen here, sort of rhetoric is out there. But again, this is a modern society. I mean, this happened less than 100 years ago in a Western society, no different than ours, really. So again, let that sink in a little bit, that these things can get out of hand real quick. It all comes out of this rhetoric that gets multiplied in some nationalist fervor. And especially within the ranks of the German army, you had to have people that were buying in to this extermination as a good thing. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done it. So again, there's a lot of things that are, a lot of dynamics that are of great interest in section 6.4, the world at war. And then finally, 6.5, the peace settlement in Europe. You'll read about the Potsdam Conference and basically just understand, we're going to read about the beginning of the Cold War as we get into the next chapters. But it's at this point in time at Potsdam where the Allies, and the Soviet Union and the U.S. and Great Britain, sort of divide up the spoils of war, East Germany and West Germany, which is before your time now. But I grew up when there was two Germanys, and the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe and all of that stuff. So this sort of sets us up for the Cold War. And then just lastly, while we're here, here's some pictures. I believe this is Berlin when my father got there. At the end of World War II, and you can see the devastation of the bombing. And then just some tank pictures, if you're into tanks at all. That's the Soviet T3. It's known as the tank that won the war, World War II. It was one of the best tanks out there. And here are some Sherman tanks, like my father drove. So there's a Sherman tank. And this picture is my dad's shot. And there's a little marking. It says me way back here. So I think that's my dad. He's not around to tell me that anymore. But I found these pictures and I thought they were great. And there is a German Tiger tank. And here's another picture of my dad by a tank that says, I want to go home, which is kind of a fun picture. And to end the story, here's the ship that my father came home on from Europe. He left July 26th and arrived in the U.S., August 2nd, it looks like. So I'm sure there was no luxuries on board of that ship, but I'm sure they didn't care because they were coming home. So that's the end of chapter 6. Read the book. We don't have an assignment this week, but some of this stuff will be on next week's assignment. Stay safe, and I'll see you for chapter 7. Bye-bye.